I have to say, y'all, I'm super excited for tonight because the person that we get to enjoy a conversation with is one of my absolute favorite humans. We have been very, very close and dear friends for a very long time. We used to work together at the salon. She is a salon owner. She is just an inspirational human. But Drea, honestly, is just one of the most exciting, successful, and intellectual new faces you're going to find within the beauty and salon industry. She has a really deep curiosity for the study of neuroscience and how that relates to our behavior. She's just got an incredible passion to learn and share her resources along with her life experiences and really just help people build a strong foundation of self-awareness, mindfulness, inner evaluation. And she believes her life purpose is to support people in becoming a better version of themselves. So please, in the chat, a huge warm welcome for my very good friend and CIQ coach, Drea Hemmer. Hi, Drea.
Hey, Andrew, thank you so much for that introduction. I mean, I just light up every time I get to spend time with you, and I'm really excited about being back on your show. So thank you all for being here and tuning in. And Andrew, thank you for having this platform to get to educate on and bring people together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you didn't see quite a few episodes ago, and this was probably about a year ago that I had you on last time, and we talked about conversational intelligence. So we're kind of picking up on where we left off because during that conversation, it was more big picture conversation. And I remember even when we had that conversation, but there were a lot of questions coming up on exactly what we're going to talk about tonight, which is how do we have great, tough conversations? Because it's one thing to have a conversation if we're just chatting and everything is great, but it's when things get hard, the communication tends to break down, right?
Mm-hmm. It's very true. And, it's interesting in I would say all areas that I've had the opportunity to play in and grow in, difficult conversations are always a part of it, right? It's a part of life. And now I'm on this other side of it where I'm coaching people, and what's seeming to show up and that I'm becoming more and more excited about and passionate about is helping people navigate and move through difficult conversations. And it is something that is uncomfortable for us, because anytime that we are faced with having a difficult conversation, our minds start to envision that we're going to harm another person. And we avoid that. We avoid wanting to hurt others. And so in turn, we avoid it, and it ends up hurting us even more. It ends up really taking away the growth experience at a difficult conversation, when knowing how to really navigate through one and prepare for one can be a growth experience. And I've loved becoming a coach and helping people grow through these type of life experiences around having difficult conversations, and to not fear them, but to actually have the tools to move through them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think one of the things you said that's so key too is there's so much more risk in not having it than actually having it. Like there's so much potential with actually stepping into these uncomfortable or challenging conversations, but there's not much potential in not having them.
Yeah, there's not. And, we all have our own sense of reality. And that's what's happening, is there's some reality gaps, right? We're looking at something, we all have expectations, we all have aspirations, and we all have needs. And whenever there's something that's showing up that is frustrating, or it's upsetting, you have anxiety around it, there's a need that's not being met. And so when we can start to understand that and just recognize that, that same person has needs and aspirations and goals as well. So how can we actually come together and start to understand what each other's needs are, what's not being met, and what we can do to co-create the best way to have mutual success in meeting each other's needs? And it's like, that's where the growth experience takes place, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can tell that this is a needed conversation because Shirley is saying, navigating a difficult conversation, sign me up. And I think it was up here. Let me find, there was a comment. Oh yeah, Holly's saying there's been some really difficult clients since the return back to work too. And so, yeah, this seems like pretty perfect timing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And Andrew, I thought about this because, we don't have, hours and hours to talk about this, and I want to respect everyone's time. And I was thinking about, what are some of those things that I can start to open up our space right now with your audience and help them start to have an understanding about what we're talking about, making sure it's relatable, and it sounds like it is. And then how do we have the tools to start to help people move through navigating a difficult conversation? And so I thought about this a lot, and it's like, one of the things, and whether you're a hairstylist or you're in a relationship with your children or your partner, is we're going to have difficult conversations show up, and a way that we can move through them, a tool that I like to share with people is one. I want everyone to understand every conversation happens in space and time. So all conversations take place in a space. And if we understand that, then we can start to understand how to prepare for a difficult conversation. How do I want to prime this space is what I'll always think about, and that can look like, how do I want this other person to feel when we get done having this conversation? How can I bring empathy into this conversation? And just starting to really, prepare my mind and prime my mind to get an understanding of how can I create the best space to have this difficult conversation in. And then the next thing that we have to look at is what I like to call, I didn't invent this, Judith Glaser, who I had gotten my certification from. She's written an amazing book called Conversational Intelligence, but I had the opportunity to work with her before she passed away. And this was one of her models. And I'm not sure if she made it up, but it came from that course that I was a part of. And it's called the trust model. And the T stands for transparency. And that's the first place I always like to start when I think about, deconstructing the conversation, thinking about, what are the things I really want to bring into this? What are the most important? If I could be at a 10 with this person, what would that look like? What would my expectations be? What do I hope to walk away with? And what do I hope for them to walk away with? And you can start to develop your honesty and then be able to bring it into that space and just start off being really transparent. This is not easy for me. I'm feeling a little bit nervous right now having to have this conversation. However, what I hope that we leave with is that we have mutual success, or that we can, at least find a way to work together and work together knowing that we're going towards the same common goal, or that we both have needs and we need to uncover what those are and see how we can work to meet each other's, if that's possible. So I think transparency is one of the things that so often, when we're overran by our emotions and when we're having to have a difficult conversation, we're already put in that part of our mind where we are having an amygdala hijack. So we're flooding ourselves with cortisol and stress, and we're trying to have this great conversation, but yet we're just so reactive. And when we're in that part of our mind, our neurons, they're unable to fire and wire. So we can't come up with our best solutions. We can't come up with new ideas or even have creativity show up. We can't think in a growth mindset. We're thinking from a protective mindset. And so we're shutting down. And so being able to just voice to somebody, hey, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. How are you feeling? I know that we're going to have to talk about some things that feel challenging or feel difficult, but I'm willing to work through this emotion to really help us get to a place where we can recover, if it's a friendship, a working relationship, or just test the assumptions that maybe aren't even true, but we have this opportunity to come into this space and really listen to connect, not listen to reject.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Holly actually just said it too. It's hard to be open when you feel defensive, and that's the thing. It's like once we go into that mode of defense or protection, it's really tough to open back up. One of the things too, just want to bring this up because as you started to talk about this transparency factor, one of the things you said did not say that we should do, and I'm glad, is that we shouldn't be throwing a bunch of emotional pillows around. I'm a big fan of that, the book, Fierce Conversations. It's one of the things she talks about in like the challenging conversations is we want to enter in and we want to try and protect people. So we start throwing emotional pillows around. It's like, oh, well, I don't want you to get upset when we have this conversation because, it's not really even a big deal. These are all emotional pillows, and that is not transparency.
At
What
all.
you said is transparency, which is like, hey, I'm actually really quite nervous to have this conversation. Like, how are you feeling?
Yes. Andrew, I love that you said that, because this is something else that I encourage and coach people, and also, hold these same things to want to show up and be this way as well. But, I'll also let that person know, like, this may be uncomfortable. Like, you might feel frustrated, or, you might get a ping, or this may seem hurtful once you hear it, but please know that I just want to make sure that all the things that I'm experiencing, or what I believe is true right now, or even the stories or the things that I'm saying to myself, I want to have the opportunity to just say them and test them with you to really find the truth here. So I think it's important to even let people know, like, this may not feel good. Just so you know, like, I'm feeling this way, but you also may not feel good after some of the things that I'm going to share, but I'm sharing them because I care. And that's something, I may have said it earlier, but you can't partner with a person. So you have to remember too, when you go into this conversation, and the next part of the trust model is relationship. And it's like, what is the relationship that I'm going for? Or what is the relationship that I'm wanting to recover? Because you can't partner unless you care. And so if you're having a difficult conversation because you just want to prove to yourself that you're right, and the ego loves to prove it's right, and so does the other person's ego. So we have to know that that's something that shows up, that, in our minds, that a lot of times it wants to prove that we're right, and that can be even more hurtful. So understanding, like, what is this relationship to me, and how important is it to me? And if you care, you will be able to get to a partnership. If you don't care, you're just going in and you're just going to add more fuel to a fire, and you have to check your intentions then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Wendy's saying, so don't explode. And yeah, that's probably not the best way to start the conversation, Wendy.
No.
Don't explode.
Don't explode, Wendy. Please don't explode it. However, I will say you can get triggered again. That the mind, it works in a place where it's not a stop and go. It's an upregulate and a downregulate. So, there's times when I'm already coming in and I'm trying to downregulate myself, and which you can do. And that's what we're trying to do with transparency. This is how I'm feeling. And the more that we can express how we're feeling, that emotion's not getting stuck in us and just festering more and more. You've given it a chance to release. You've been able to share. So now you're able to fill up with something new, and you're helping the mind just start to prime itself to realize that it's a safe space, because it's already come in feeling it's a bit threatening, right? So
Yeah.
there are going to be times, though, that as you're in these conversations, that you may get triggered again. And it's so important in that moment to also, again, be transparent. Like, hey, I'm kind of feeling a little bit more frustrated than maybe even when we started. So I need to, like, let's take a time out and just stop it. Like, stop that thought pattern, stop that energy, and just, do a safe timeout. And those timeouts can be 5 minutes. Those timeouts can be 24 hours. And there has been times, depending on, what the content is that we're discussing and wanting to move through, that there's been a time that I've said, hey, I think I'm going to need some time to really just wrap my arms around this conversation that we're going to be needing to pick up on. Would it make sense if we did kind of take a time out here? And I hope you can respect that that's the space I need right now, but I am willing to come back and see how we can work through this. So that can happen. So I'm glad that Wendy actually said that, because it has happened, and it will happen when you've went in and things started to still go a little bit sideways in the conversation. And, there's this other part, and I'm going to keep going through the trust model, but there is another conversational essential that I think is so important, and it's called reframe, refocus, and redirect. And you want to think about, like, as you bring context into something, or contents into something, what frame are you putting around this? And the frame can be a belief, and it can be a limiting belief, or it can be a belief that, I want to put this into, what are the possibilities? What would the future look like if we were to look at this through a different lens? And that's just reframing the context that you're bringing in, and then also refocusing. And this is a way to also, like, help people interrupt the thought pattern that they're having. Like, what if the opposite were true? Or what if we were to look at it this way? Or I've worked with someone that was having this same challenge, and this is what they did to get through it. So you're helping yourself refocus on possibilities versus on refocusing again on just wanting to prove that you're right, or focusing on that limiting belief system that's not going to allow you to have that growth experience, and then you'll see yourself redirect reframe, refocus, and then redirect yourself into a better outcome.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in that process, I would imagine you're also kind of giving the other person permission to do the same. Like if they need to step away or if they need to, move it in a different direction, it's like, hey, this is obviously a two-way conversation. So I want you to feel free to do the same thing.
Yeah. And again, oftentimes I think it's so important, and I'll check in with them, because again, this is bringing that care and that candor into these difficult conversations. Is I'll ask them, like, how are you feeling? Or if I can tell that they are still really closed down, when you know the way the mind works, and if this person is still in those protective behaviors, which protective behaviors show up if they're, limiting information, if they're withholding information, if they're criticizing, if they're dictating, like those are protecting behaviors. And so if I notice that those are happening and I want to interrupt them, I'll just ask them, like, how are you feeling right now? Like, I just want to make sure, and I'll let them share, but I'll also, if they're still withholding, I'll say, I feel like you're still like really closed right now, or I feel like you're really upset right now. Is that true? And that's another way to help them move out of that emotion and to recognize that you're paying attention. It's not all about you, and that you care and you want to partner.
Yep. The stupid fly, Drea. It's like dive bombing me now.
It's found its new home, Andrew.
Right. It's like, I love you, Andrew.
So, there's the trust model is an acronym. I should have said that at the beginning, so T stands for transparency. R stands for relationship. U stands for understanding. And I think it's so important to really find out where that other person's at, so you can stand underneath their reality as well. So a lot of times when we're in a difficult conversation, we have to look to close reality gaps. And one of the things that I'll do here is, instead of just agreeing to things that this person is bringing to the table as well, a lot of times we just think that we know what they're talking about. And I'll go in, and it's called double clicking. And I'll take a word that, for an example, if someone says, I just feel like you're a little all over the place, or, when you were working with me, it just seemed like you just were all over the place. And that could be like what it looks like to me. I could be like, oh, this person's distracted, but to that person I'm having the conversation with, it's important for me to stop and double click on that, so that I can get some more information and find out what that meaning is for them, and asking them, like, what did double clicking look like to you? Help me understand what being all over the place look like to you. And it's interesting because the way that person can describe what it looked like is completely different than what your reality was. So now you're starting to stand underneath their reality, and you're having a way to listen, to connect, and to understand, so that you can meet them where they're at, they can meet you where they're at, and you guys can both get where you want to go. So it's important to also check in there with knowing, like you said, this isn't just about you. If you're having a conversation, it's about co-creating the best outcome for both of you. And the way we do that is to also find out what's happening for them, and to want to understand what's happening for them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw this question come up, and I don't want to forget about it. So I'm going to pull this in just for a moment with us. Do you think because everyone was isolated for so long, we have kind of forgotten how to communicate face to face, and having to relearn a new skill, or relearn a skill?
Gosh, I think it's a skill that is always an ongoing, lifelong skill set that we have to practice. And unfortunately, I'll speak from my own experience. I learned how to communicate, like most people, at 2-3 years old, or maybe 4 for some of us. But there's not a lot of this information that we grew up getting to understand, that words carry energy and words change your world, and even understanding really what trust is, and how to develop it, how to recover it, how to cultivate it, understanding all those things that really create healthy relationships, understanding what empathy is, and how to have it for yourself so that you can have it for others, and just really how powerful words are. I mean, you think about, people can say just through their words something that feels so hurtful and so debilitating, and we think about it for years, possibly forever, or we lose sleep over it, and that's how much energy our words carry. So I think it's a skill set that if we can continue to develop our awareness around how we use our words, what tone do we use, and be playful with them, like start to look at, like, how did I approach this, and I've been approaching it and getting the result that I'm getting. How could I change the approach? Like, how could I start to sound different, or to use a different word that doesn't have so much, meaning that everyone has, what's it called? Like, there's one word that has been used so often, but can have multiple meanings, right? And
Mhm.
keep using those same words. And I just think it's so important. And so I don't think it's necessarily just after, for me personally, and that doesn't mean that has to be for you or for everyone, but I think it maybe created some new awareness because we got a timeout. We were kind of like taken away and put back in, but we really have muscle memory. And so we come back into these spaces doing a lot of things that we did before, but it can feel maybe, different because the awareness is there now, and we're starting to understand something that just seems a little bit different because it wasn't just yesterday, right? Which I think is such a blessing through the pandemic, because people's awareness has been heightened, and to have any beneficial change in your life, you have to have awareness. That's the foundation. And that's what I love about being able to speak around conversations and around the way we use our words, is if we can become aware of even the way we speak to ourselves, it makes it so much different when we're having to have a difficult conversation. Because if we've learned to be kind to ourselves, and we've learned how to have compassion and have gratitude for us, when we approach something that seems really scary or really difficult, and we can learn how to be more hardwired now, or I should say have default thinking around, how can I look at this with care, or how can I look at this with love, or through the lens of love, or, instead of just doing what we've always done, which is, it's hardwired in us and our minds to want to protect us. So our default thinking and the stories that it makes up when it doesn't have all the information is actually scary, because the mind thinks it's protecting us. It's the oldest part of the mind is the primitive mind, which is where fear comes from and where stress comes from. And, our minds have evolved, but that region of our mind, it still doesn't know if it's protecting us from a saber-toothed tiger or from a difficult conversation. So It's still releasing that adrenaline and that stress. But the thing that's amazing about understanding the way the mind works and how our words move us to different regions in our mind, we can down-regulate that stress, and we can down-regulate that cortisol just by using different words. By, in a conversation, when someone's upset, help me understand why this is so upsetting to you. Like, staying really neutral and being in that place, like, I care, to really prime the space. I love to come into that saying, before we get started, I want you to know that I care about you. Like, I'm having this conversation because I care. And that, just saying that and using those words, you've already started down regulating the cortisol and up regulating the oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical, the bonding hormone. And if we're flooded with cortisol and we're in our protective mind, it blocks oxytocin. It blocks the oxytocin's ability to start to get us into that region of our mind, which is our prefrontal cortex, that allows us to open up and to connect and bond with another person. That's how important this is, to understand the way you're using your words. And this is how you can start to navigate through these difficult conversations.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that you have brought in kind of like the neuroscience aspect of it, because I think it's important to recognize that there is actually a chemical process happening within your body through the course of this conversation. It's not just, does it feel good or not? It actually is, does it feel good? Because there's a chemical process that's happening based on how you're having the conversation.
Mhm.
And I just want to hit a couple of these comments too, because there's some great stuff happening in the chat here. Yeah, and Shirley's saying certainly learned that words carry different meanings for each person, which is
Yes.
huge. Holly's saying that yeah, words do carry so much power. This
Mhm.
is this is interesting too, because I think it goes to part of what you were saying. I'm often confounded when someone says these things and others weren't around or taught years ago. They were. I understand rebranding and refreshing these subjects, which is a great thing. And I think that this is so key what Mana Mana is saying, which is part of the empathy that we can show to other people is recognizing that they weren't brought up with this kind of information. Like
Yes.
this wasn't something that was taught in school. So unless you had a great parent that was skilled in the process of conversation, you probably had no lessons as a child what it looks like to have a productive, challenging conversation. Because I am sure that none of us had it in math class, English class, history class. It didn't happen. And so I think to Manamana's point, like that's part of what we can show up with empathy.
Yes.
Because one of the things you said too is on the other side of the conversation, they might be getting defensive. They might be angry. They might be starting to use words that don't feel good to us. And in
Mhm.
that moment, we can either react and like kind of step into our fighting place, or we can go, I'm going to stay here in some compassion and empathy with a
Yes.
sense of, I know they're getting upset. So I'm going to do my best to try and hold some space and be
Yes.
empathetic to this is how they know to react to this.
I love that. That just brought up some thoughts around we and research and science has shown this now that we have the ability to co-regulate another person. So
Wow.
Andrew, when you're saying, if I can live in this place of empathy and compassion and hold that space, you are actually able to co-regulate another person. So help them down regulate their cortisol just by the energy that you're showing up with and able to stay grounded in. And
So
this is why I love, and I think it's so important. And I talked about, awareness being the foundation to any beneficial change. This is why there's now, so much research, thank God, around mindfulness, because if we can practice this stuff when no one else is around, it's what you get recognized for in the public, right? What you do when no one is watching is what you get recognized for in the public. So when you have, and even if it's, don't judge it. It doesn't have to be hours or look like everybody else's. Mindfulness is like an umbrella, just like the word sports. It's a mindfulness practice could be like, if I say sport, I play sports, you could start to think, is it tennis? Is it basketball? Is it baseball? Is it softball? Is it racquetball? And mindfulness is the same thing. There are so many practices that fall underneath that umbrella. But what's important is that we start to bring them into our lives, especially if we want to have an amazing impact in our relationships and in this world, is being able to practice this stuff, journaling and really starting to have forgiveness and empathy for yourself, because you're not going to be perfect at this stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've went into a conversation. I had one just 2 days ago, and I've been studying this for many years, and I coach with it on a daily basis. And, when I did my reflection, it was like, if anything was possible and I could go back and change anything, like, how would I have changed my approach, or what did I miss? And, the first thing I realized is I was like, wow, I didn't prime the space. I wasn't transparent. I just went in, asking questions right away, which was probably the thing I learned most, or probably one of the first things I learned when I started to become a coach, is like always going asking, always going asking. And there is truth to that. But I think now, knowing that conversations happen in a space and that we have the ability to prime the space, to be able to go in first and be transparent with, what you hope the outcome to be, where you're coming from, and then going in and asking, I can honestly say that the outcome would have been much different. And the part I want to share on this is, it doesn't mean because it didn't go right the first time that you can't go back and recover or have another opportunity. And that takes a lot of courage, but do it, go in and again, be vulnerable and be transparent. Look, I want another shot at having this conversation. I feel like even though we moved through it, I think it could be even better. And I really want to get to understand what that mutual success looks like. And that's what the S is in the trust model. So S is mutual success. And it's like, I feel like we feel like we're on the right track. But however, I want to make sure that we really understand, like, what do you hope for out of us deciding that this is the best way that we're going to take, this work together? Is I want to check in with you. And I feel like we could be even stronger if we were to really revisit this conversation. And, it's interesting because I was feeling something, and I'm grateful that I had the courage to really pay attention to our, we all have emotional guides, and my emotional guide was still not feeling like there was the alignment that I'd hoped for. And that's what success would look like for me, right? Is being able to really know that, like, we're human, and sometimes it may take more than one conversation. And the outcome, having that second conversation, was so much better. And I just gained more trust from this person because they really saw that I cared. Like, I didn't just like leave it at it being, just kind of okay. It was like, no, I want to make sure that, like, we both feel like we can, co-create whatever it is, and we can move mountains together because we know that we're going towards the same thing. And what we're going towards is what meets your need and what meets my need. Right.
Absolutely. And thank you for almost giving us permission to let that part go. Because I know for myself, a lot of times with these kind of challenging conversations, I do kind of have this sensation that it's like, okay, you got one shot here. You better do a good job, because if you screw this up, the relationship's probably over. You're gonna, melt everything down. And the reality is that story that we tell ourselves leading up to the conversation, it's almost never true. Almost never, ever true. And so I love that you shared with us, like, look, if you didn't get it right the first time, come back and say, you know what? Hey, I'm going to be, humble enough to say, I don't know that I handled this conversation as well as I could have. Can we come back into this for a moment? And so beautiful. It's so fantastic.
And this is why I think the trust model, and I hope your listeners are being able to really, connect to this, because you just went right back up to the top, right? Like, I just have to be transparent again. And then you look at, like, I want this relationship. I want it to feel even better. And I want to understand, how were you feeling after we left? Like, what was your understanding as we walked away? And there you're standing underneath their reality again. And then, going into the shared success. And the last part of the trust model is test assumptions. And that's the place that once you've kind of went through this, you've got to that place where you've been transparent, you understand where you want the relationship or hope for it to go. You know what a sense of understanding is for them, what shared success is. Then that's that place where the space is getting safe, where you can say, you know what, I want to make sure that we test any assumptions that we hold or we held before we came into this space. This is the time that we get to be really honest with one another and just stop the stories that our mind's going to keep making up, because the mind's a storyteller. And what's interesting about the mind is when the mind takes in information, like by bits, right? Like chunks of information. And so the information that it's missing, it starts to create a story to try to bring all the information together. And when it's missing information, that information that it's missing, it defaults to wanting to protect us. So it tells us a scary story. And that's what's so important about mindfulness, is because if you can stop that story before you become ruminating in it, and it becomes, just like you said, it's never what I thought it was. What is that saying? 99% of the things I think that are going to go wrong don't. It's, but that's the way the mind works, and it's hardwired in us, because its main job, the primitive mind, is to protect us. So it's doing its job. But the thing that we have to do is we have to partner with it. We have to start to understand our minds. And the thing that I like to share with people I coach and work with is, you know what? It should be a goal to want to understand and master your mind. You are the ruler of the mind, and you're the only one that gets the opportunity to know your mind. I mean, there's, therapy or doctors that can help us try to understand our mind, but really we need to do the work as well to start to understand our minds. And that's such a gift to get to have the opportunity to have a tool or awareness in that process of getting to understand our own minds. And it's not an easy process, but I think, journaling is one of those things that it will help you going into a difficult conversation, because anytime that you can write out what's happening in the mind and get it in front of you, now it becomes more tangible. There's more concrete. You're able to actually see something in front of you versus something that's just like floating up in your mind and you're trying to make sense of it while so many other things are also showing up in the way of your thoughts or what your senses are picking up and bringing in because of the present moment. So there's just a lot that I could say about that. But I think that along with the trust model, mindfulness is, it's so important, because a lot of times when you're in your space of doing your practices, you're like, is this even doing anything? Is this like, I don't feel like anything's happening. And it's not necessarily right there, but I always think of like, it's like this silent reservoir that you're just like building and building each time that you're sitting down to journal or, a nature walk or breathing work or meditation, so that when you get in these places of where it feels threatening or scary, that you can, again, like we talked about, regulate yourself, because you can pull from that silent reservoir. You've been practicing it when no one else is watching, when things weren't difficult around you, so that when you step into those difficult spaces, now it shows up. Now it's there to partner with you to help you move through that. And I think so often, people approach those difficult conversations looking for, comfort, or looking for the sense of calmness, but it's not something that they were even doing when it wasn't scary, and so then we get even more frustrated as to like, why am I still so upset, or why am I still so anxious? And those are going to show up. It's part of the human experience to experience emotions. And even with mindfulness, you're still going to have, anxiety and stress show up in your life. However, the ability to recover from them becomes a lot quicker when you have a mindfulness practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to tap into a couple things here. I saw how you were asking about an example. If you could give us an example of like a challenging conversation that we might have with a client, I'm sure Drea and I would love to kind of take that on and look at kind of a specific example. So just kind of think of what you might, what kind of conversation you might suggest that we look at. Also, Shirley says those nattering, floating bits distract. Yes, absolutely. When we're sitting down to be mindful, the little floaty bits definitely can distract. Robbie, this is really key. Being prepared is key. Mm-hmm. And I do want to bring this to the table too. These things don't happen naturally. This isn't just how we are. I think actually I saw Shirley had mentioned earlier, like, wow, this seems like it would take practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It does take practice. And, there's a concept that I like to think about, and I learned in my CIQ, is deconstructing a conversation. And what that means is not demolition, but it's actually going in before I go into a conversation. And I start to I just kind of look at it at as many angles, what is it that I hope for, or what is my mental model around this, or what do I know is true, and I just keep kind of peeling back like the layers of the onion, just to kind of figure out like as much as I can and what's the most important to bring into that conversational space. And then I want to prepare myself for a growth experience. And when you can start to tell yourself that it's going to be something different than scary, it will start to feel different than scary, right? And I love that with, someone had said something about using words that don't have so many meanings attached to them. And it's the same for ourselves. Like, I'm going to prepare myself for a growth experience. Like, I really want to grow in this. And I know that without challenges, we could not grow. That's part of it. Growing pains are called that for a reason. Like, when we don't know what to expect and there's uncertainty that we're facing, if we move through it, we're always going to learn something. And it's the same thing with a conversation, because we don't know how that other person's going to respond or react. And that's another part that makes it scary. However, if you can just allow whatever shows up on their end, but be prepared on how you can be your best self showing up for them, you'll start to see yourself grow in that experience. So yes, you have to prepare. I think failing to are failing.
Prepare to
Yeah,
fail.
is failing to or preparing to fail. And it's the same for a conversation. And I think that is another part that can be someone's blind spot is you get this information, or even if it's within a guest experience, and in the consultation they say something that triggers you, and instead of just like taking a moment, like it's so hard for a lot of humans to just allow themselves some space, like go walk out of that space so you can prime it as you come back in to have a better outcome. And again, that's part of preparing, like I need a moment. Let me just kind of wrap my mind now around maybe the expectation or what you had just brought into our experience, and give me just a moment. And again, tone is so important, because we don't want to have our tone keep putting them in their protective behaviors and feel threatened by us. That's where, again, we have to practice that compassion. It's not about me. I can't take this personal. And I want to make sure that I can actually help redirect them into a place that we can have mutual success together. So preparation, it can be done overnight. It can also be done in a moment by just taking a pause. Okay, give me a moment, because I want to make sure I gather my best thinking. When you're triggered, your best thinking will not show up, because when you're triggered and you're feeling like your mind's feeling like it has to protect itself, again, you can't fire and wire to make new pathways to have new thoughts. So if you're even in a consultation and you've been triggered and you can't figure out like where you're going to go or what you're going to do next, and your ideas aren't showing up, it's because you're in that primitive mind space. So you need to take a time out. Let me go breathe. And breathing regulates our heart and our mind into opening us back up to that prefrontal cortex. So even going in the bathroom and starting to breathe, inhale for 3 and then say, I'm exhaling, I'm inhaling, and having a mantra come with it, just so that we can start to calm our mind. And, it seems maybe silly or hokey for people, that maybe are hearing this for the first time. And I was one of those people, like, really, how am I supposed to breathe when I'm just like, the last thing I'm thinking about is my breath when I'm trying to recover a guest experience? It's like, no, that should be the first thing we think about, because then we can get back to the region of our mind that we want to show up in, because we'll have more ideas. Our creativity will come back. Empathy lives in that part of our mind. Trust lives in that part of our mind. And that's what we're going for. So the breath can be our greatest teacher and tool in those moments.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
it's a direct. Say that again.
It's available to all of us. We all have it. And so.
Yeah, it's the quickest thing to tap into the nervous system is to go through the breath, and you calm the breath, you calm the nervous system. And that's exactly what we're kind of fighting against in this process, because as soon as we get into that fight or flight mode, as soon as we get into a little bit of defense mode, the nervous system is jacking up. We're going into the sympathetic part of our nervous system to prepare for the fight. And as soon as you go into the sympathetic, it starts to shut down the prefrontal cortex so that it doesn't think too much, and we go primitive on it. And that's where we have that reactivity that we all know so well. In the moment, we're like, why did I say that to that person? And it's because you weren't thinking from your thinking part of mind. You were just reacting from the primitive part of the mind.
Yes, I love that. And, I think like another way to help people as they move through life and are going to have multiple opportunities to practice this stuff, because we're going to always be faced with a conversation that's going to feel difficult. I really believe it's part of growing. And there's something that I learned through my emotional intelligence, one of my emotional intelligence course, and it was called a trigger log. And I did it for 30 days. And what it was is, at the end of every day, I would ask myself, a time in my day that I was triggered. And then what was that trigger? A person, place, or thing. How did I react to the trigger? And how long did I stay in that reactive behavior? And it's, again, I said it and I'm going to say it again, is the key or the foundation or the key to any beneficial change is we have to have awareness. And that's what this did, is it helped me become aware of, different things in my environment that were actually triggering me that I wasn't paying attention to. And wouldn't have recognized if I wouldn't have did this exercise. So it heightened my awareness in blind spots that I was having. And so easy we get, used to just defaulting to maybe what we think it is, because then it gives the mind a sense of release for a second, like we figured it out. But then, shortly after, we're triggered again. And this just helps us be able to really start to understand what's in our environments, what relationships are we a part of that are actually, putting us into this place of not having fulfillment in our lives because we're upset when we're in those places or spaces with people. So it doesn't mean that you have to, get rid of the relationship. And maybe you do. Every relationship has, it can expire. I think, we all are going to expire one day. So relationships are that same way. And I think that this can help just have like a way to move into even those spaces with a lot more clarity and compassion and to allow, because, we're all going for fulfillment, that the purpose in life is to feel good and to do good and, to really enjoy this gift of life. And the way we enjoy it is by doing this type of work. So the trigger log was something that I think allows you to recover quicker and know what those things are that are triggering you. So again, if you know that it's a conversation, you have a way to even be transparent with some data, that you've been collecting that you can share with that person. Because a lot of times they wouldn't know. And that also can help them stay a lot calmer if they can see that you've been doing the work and you prepared yourself coming into this.
Absolutely. I want to hit this question, and then Holly did kind of pop in a specific example of like a tough conversation. Maybe we can kind of role play it out. That'd be kind of fun. So B. Shannon Shaw is asking, is it best to be honest that you need a moment, or is it better to make an excuse so you're not putting them off thinking they offended you?
I love this question. Something that I believe is I'm going to speak for myself. I believe that developing honesty is exactly that. And a lot of times a protective behavior is, again, wanting to withhold information. And what I found is that old saying has proved that it is 100% true for me, that honesty is the best policy. And so, I used to do the same thing where I would, try to cover that up. And again, that did not feel good. It felt like I was lying, and that just doesn't feel good. And I'm going to say experiment with this. Be your own experimenter is something that Judith Glaser used to always say to us is, be your own experimenter and experiment with when this shows up. Again, this is why I love speaking about this, because you're going to have plenty of opportunities in the next 24 hours to use this information, because we're especially if you're in the industry of hair, we're in the relationship business. So we have a lot of relationships that we're managing around us all during the days, but really be honest. I find that people really value that. And then it gives them also that permission and awareness that they can be honest. And I find that there's been times that when I've said that, even, in my coaching practice, where there's just, something that showed up that I wasn't ready for, that I've just said, honestly, like, I feel like I need some time to really digest this and just absorb it a little bit and then learn how I could work with it the best. So would you mind if we revisited this? And I can call you in 24 hours if you're available, or if there's something, sooner that we can look at, then let's look at that. And then there's been times where it's not been a coaching conversation and it's been, something that's really a person, a friend, a husband, that I've had to say, like, I can tell if I keep in this space right now, we're not going to get to the best outcome. And I value you, I value me. And I need some time again to just cool myself. Like I've even told someone, like, I'm having an amygdala hijack. Like I am not in a good place right now. And that's been okay too. So I think it is more important to develop that honesty, to share that honesty, and you'll see that person come back and want to partner with you even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's a compassionate path to honesty too. Like, hey, you're really pissing me off right now and I need to step away. Might not be the most compassionate way to say that. So, maybe there's a way to say it like, I'm getting amygdala hijacked right now. One of the things that in fierce conversations that she teaches too is to keep it in the I. And I think Judith kind of teaches this too, which is like, keep it in the I. Tell them what you're experiencing, not what they're doing to you. Because
Mhm.
as soon as I say, you're pissing me off right now, so I need to go take a break, that puts them on the defense. If I say, hey, I'm noticing my energy is just kind of like not where I want it to be right now in this conversation. Do you mind if I take a break for a minute? That feels completely different to people.
Oh
If
my
I'm
gosh.
talking about my experience versus what they're doing to me.
I love that you brought that up. And, last time I was on your show, we talked about push and pull, and just how
Mhm.
to create a healthy conversation. And that just what you did is being able to say, like, I notice that my energy is not where I want it to be to have this conversation. And I would love to have the opportunity to, take a time out and pick back up on this tomorrow. How does that sound for you? And
Yeah.
just being able to like check in with them again is another place that a lot of people miss that part. They just want to exit after they say their part. And it's like, remember, this is between you and another person. And when you show that you're also acknowledging that you want to, hear back from them, even though you're checking out, you'll
Mhm.
see that they'll also feel a lot lighter. Like, actually, yeah, I'm okay. Or when could we pick this up? You know what, I will get back to you by the end of the day to set this back up, or we can go look right now, whatever the options are available for you. But that way you can both know that you're taking a good break, and that when you come back in, you're both going to be primed and ready to have a really great conversation, and change it to that too. Like I said that earlier, but I'll always let this person know, like, this isn't easy for me, but I know this is going to be a growth experience, or I know that we're going to walk away, learning something really great, because we're going to have a good conversation. And I think even just being able to help yourself deregulate, to a place of like, I want to think more about good things versus like feeling like it's so difficult, because that can really prime the mind for a threat just in the way you're saying it.
Absolutely. All right. So of course we're like jamming right to the very end of the hour, but I want to get to this quick example.
Mhm.
So let's role play this real quick. I'll be the client, you be the hairdresser, because these are the kind of conversations that come up at the chair, and these aren't like these life-altering moments, but still really important. So Holly had given the example of a client that you get the example, you get the Instagram photo and all that, and you do their hair, and then they go, well, this doesn't look like the picture I showed you.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
how do we have that challenging conversation? So I'll be the client, you be the hairdresser. So I just said, well, this doesn't look like the picture I showed you.
Okay. So I kind of have to work at this in a couple ways.
Yep.
The when I have somebody that comes in that has not loved what I've given them, I always like to look back into the consultation and just start to understand, where was it that I missed my opportunity, to gather more information. And so I'll go in and I'll want to go back and reflect on that consultation. When the guest comes in and they're like, it doesn't look anything like this, stay calm. Again, like, okay, let that person know that you heard them. All right.
Mhm.
So I can tell, and help me know if this is true. I always will. But you are not happy with the result of what I did with your hair. Yeah, I'm not happy. It doesn't look like the picture. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's discover together. What is it that you're seeing in the photo that is not happening, in your hair? Help me understand what part is really off for you. And just again, like, I'm double clicking in a sense, like, help me understand, like, what is it that you're not seeing? And then when we look at your hair, what part of it that if there is a part of it that you do like, is there anything on here that is there a part of the hair looking or resembling or what you'd hope for? And then I think being able to check expectations, I want to make sure that I really understand what you're expecting here. So looking at her hair, looking at the reality, what your hair is, like, what are your expectations? And then as a professional, making sure that you're not over, like, yes, I can over promise, I can do this. And you're not, and I almost like weigh on the stuff of under promising, like, I'm going to do my very best, we need to make sure that we're looking at this and seeing what's best for your hair, your hair health, your hair texture, your hair type. So that's where I wanted to look at that in two angles. Is I always look and want to see, especially with a photo. I just had a guest that came in yesterday with a photo, and immediately you could see these photos looked very different from the hairs, the guest texture, the guest color. Like there was, and and I could have just been like, nope, but it was like, wait, what is she seeing? I want to know what is happening in her reality. So when I went in and started to look in and was in that discovery mode with her, I really had to start looking at like, okay, so let's just take this in chunks. So let's look at, around the ear. What are you seeing around the ear? What's attractive to you in this one? Because does this one look the same as this one? And she's like, actually, it doesn't. So you really have to do a lot of discovery. And I think just keep finding the reality gap. Like, what is it that you love about this photo? What do you love about what I did in your hair? If there's something, is there anything that's representing what you see in this photo as to what we did in and on your hair? So that's how I would look at that. And you can add on to that, Andrew, if there's something that you would bring into that as well.
I think everything you said is just spot on. I think that like lots of people actually just typed it into the chat too, of the setup of let's discover this together, because that co-creation aspect, a lot of times I think what happens to us as hairdressers, because we're artists and we take pride in our work, when someone comes in and says, this doesn't look like the picture, I don't like it, let's be honest, it's really hard to not go like, well, I did my best, because it hurts. Like it hurts the old ego that it's like, ouch, like I thought we actually had a great consultation. I thought we kind of nailed this color and now you're upset with me. And so it is really tough to kind of check in and go, okay, I'm here to be in co-creative with this person, and setting that up from the very beginning. Like, hey, look, I can tell you're not very happy with this. My intention is to co-create something with you to make this right. Let's do this together. Man, like that is so key to bring them in and talk about down regulating the energy, because I'm pretty sure that if they're upset about their hair, especially if they're the kind of person that their hair is a big part of their identity, they're going to already be upset. They're going to be ready for the fight too. When you come in and you don't respond to the fight and you do what Drea just shared with us, and they're going to go, oh, okay, this isn't going to be a fight. I can chill out now. Like, let's do this together. So I think just that is spot on. Spot on.
Yeah, I love that. And it sets you apart. I mean, it's so amazing when you get to bring someone in that's used to having a fight with the hairdresser,
Yeah.
and seeing like their eyes light up, and then they tell you like, gosh, thank you so much for really bringing me back in and wanting to really make this right, or to talk to me about it. There's so many coaching opportunities that I get to have with stylists, and helping them prepare for a difficult conversation to call back a guest that's needing a refinement. They want to flee, fight or flight. They want to fly. They want to run from it. And it's like, look, let's talk about, again, this, let's really fact check your fear. And what could be the worst thing that could go wrong? They're already unhappy. What could be the best thing that just you calling up and being able to say, hey, I care about you. I care about your hair, and I really want to have the opportunity to bring you back in and discover together how we can make this right.
Yes, absolutely. And Holly Stone just said it so true. They will be a client for life if they feel understood. And our favorite coach, when Christian, she's a big fan of, I'm sure she probably had you read Creating Customer Evangelists. And in that book, Creating Customer Evangelists, it talks about the fact that the client that is willing to call you and complain actually has the potential to be your greatest customer evangelist. Because if they're willing to actually call you and say, because it's not comfortable for them to say, hey, I don't like my hair. So if they actually care enough and they trust you enough to make that call, oh my gosh, the potential right there is just huge.
It's huge. Andrew, I love, and I'll end on this because I know we're at the top of the hour, but I think that like that's one of those things where I share so much gratitude, and I hope to influence my team that way too. That it's like, that my favorite saying by Dr. Wayne Dyer is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, and they come in all forms and disguises. And those are those moments. Again, they're growing pains. There's a lot of discomfort there, which means there's going to be a lot of growth there if we're willing and self willing to really discover what we can learn. But it's like those are the guests that I look back and I'm like, thank you, because I couldn't have learned that in a class. I couldn't have learned that on a webinar. Like, it was a real life experience that will always resonate much deeper in how and what I can learn from them.
Absolutely. Just this was incredible. I know you don't have the comments turned on, but I hope you look back at the video afterwards, because just so much learning that has happened today, and just lots and lots of comments here throughout the chat, just talking about how much they learn and how much they gain from this today. So I do want to shout out Drea and her good friend have a incredible podcast that does dive deeper into some of this stuff. And at the bottom of Drea's screen, you can see the Instagram handle, We Are Head to Heart. So if you go to @We Are Head to Heart on Instagram, you'll find their podcast, which is just filled with great content. And then Drea, you work with people on this kind of content. So how can they get in touch with you to potentially work with you?
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all your listeners for showing up and just feeding their minds with great stuff that can allow us to continue to grow and become a better version of ourselves. But you can find me, like Andrew said, on our We Are Head to Heart. That's an Instagram handle. I also have a personal Instagram, Drea, at Drea Hemmer. And then I have a website that is weshowup.love. And those are all, really easy ways to be in touch with me. I'm very active on them. And, I do a lot of work where I come in and I work with a lot of leadership teams and different types of professionals to help them continue to develop those best qualities so that they can really enjoy and love doing whatever it is that they're doing. So those are those great places you can find me. Our podcast, we've had some incredible guests, and we're just finishing up the first season and gearing up for the second with some really great guests that are coming on, and that's just, that's been really fun to get to be on a platform that, again, it's free for people, and they can tune in and feed their mind and their heart with a lot of great information and learn new resources that can continue to just add more and more value to their lives and their relationships that they're a part of in their lives.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Drea. I'm so excited to have you on, and I get to come visit you and your team in just a few weeks, which I'm so excited for.
I'm so excited for that. And it's like getting to co-create and bring, experiences to teams and getting to do it with you, Andrew. It's like, oh my gosh, any chance that I get to share the floor with you or have you be a part of educating our team and sharing your passion and your knowledge and your wisdom, it's like Christmas. It's like Christmas. I just can't wait. So thank you so much for bringing me back on Wellness Wednesday. I love what you guys do. I love the Samvia team. You guys provide so much education and are making such a beautiful impact in our industry. And I can't thank you and your team enough for the ongoing efforts and love and care you put into everything you guys do. So thank you. And thank you to your audience and for supporting this and showing up and being a part of this, because we couldn't do it without, great people and a great community. So I'm grateful for your community.
Yeah. We'd just be standing here talking to ourselves if we didn't have you all. So absolutely.
So true.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Drea.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your week, everyone.